Welcome back to We Built an Empire. I'm your host, Kyle Wolff. In today's episode, we talked to a commander of a drug task force unit about the impact of fentanyl in Colorado communities.
Have you ever felt?
Are you listening? Damn. Yeah.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to another episode of We Built an Empire. Appreciate you guys tuning in tonight. This is our first show in our live session studio. A really good friend of mine, Joey, is on board. Due to the nature of his job and environment, we are going to be doing a different filming strategy. So we'll just keep it at that. Joey, thank you so much for being on, man. It's really good to have you.
Me. Yeah, excited to be here.
It's been a long time since we've seen each other. I think we had a lot less grays in our beards.
Way a lot less.
Well, man, I'm so happy that you're here. I wanted to have you come on specifically to talk about some things. You know, we were in a conference, seems like a couple of months ago now. You were there and kind of just got the chance to step back and hear what you had to say. That meeting specifically was about awareness of fentanyl all over the county. And in the state. And so I wanted to have you come on and talk about that. And I do want to hear, obviously, some of your backstory, because I don't know if we've seen each other in 15 years prior to that conference. But, I'm just happy to have you on, because I do think that, the topic around, especially like fentanyl awareness or the lack thereof is huge, in our local community. And it's literally, it's killing people. And so I'm really happy to have you on, but so why don't we go ahead, if you don't mind, just give us a little bit of your backstory, kind of the 2-minute skinny, and then we'll deep dive into it and kind of come back around to the fentanyl topic, which is, I want to drill into that as heavy as I can, but I want to give people some context about what it is that you do, as much of it as you can talk about. If you can't, no worries.
All right. Yeah. So I started in law enforcement back in 2009, worked the jail, worked patrol, worked some SWAT. I've been an instructor in a lot of stuff. I had the opportunity to move over to the drug task force a few years ago, where I was made the drug unit commander. And that's from a day-to-day basis now. We have several different agencies involved in that task force. I supervise all of them. And our mission is to go after the actual traffickers that are bringing all this stuff into the communities. So it's changed a lot just in the last few years from when I was there as far as drugs are. Fentanyl was just kind of starting when I went to the drug task force. And it's blown up a lot. It's kind of the major threat right now in the U.S., really. And it's getting pretty scary.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I have a lot of friends and family that live and breathe in the medical industry, whether they're EMTs or doctors or whatever it is. And, we've always heard the word fentanyl, it's still used and was always widely used. I mean, the worst case scenario you'd hear is about, a drug addict nurse or something that had, had an addiction and took a patch or something. But, so when it started to become more of a prevalent conversation, I think with people, it didn't really click at first with me. I don't know if a lot of people have that same situation, but, for me, it was, you hear the word fentanyl, and then it's like, well, now we're finding it mixed or laced with other things, and it's killing people, or it's harming people, or forever altering their way of life. And so, when I got the chance to sit and hear you talk about it, that was pretty interesting to me, because I have 2 younger children, and it's kind of sad from time to time when you start to kind of look at the way that we were raised, or we grew up. And like at this Halloween, we got done and we had to dump out all the candy on the countertop, and we're going through anything that could potentially have been opened, and like throwing it away. And it's like, I'm sitting there doing this, kind of to protect my children. And at the same time, I'm thinking like, this is fucking horrible that we're having to do this, to protect our kids. Right. Because you just never know. And it's just something like, when I reached out and I was like, man, I want somebody who knows this, who lives and breathes this specific thing day in and day out, to come in and talk to people. So that way that we can kind of get this message out there. Cause I still think that there's a lot of people that they may know, cause it's a very buzzword, fentanyl. But I think that there's such a severity with it, and I was just talking to a friend the other day, and the two girls. I'm not sure if both of them passed away, but they were two sisters at a local school here, and unfortunately, I don't know that if it's been proven or not, but at least what the paper was saying is that there was some potential like drug use, and one of them did pass away, and so it's like, it's like almost like you can't. I'm not condoning what I'm about to say, but it's like there's a lot of people that when they get out of the wings or the arms of their parents and they go to school and they go to colleges or whatever, maybe they never partied a day in their life, but when they get to there, it's kind of like they're trying to like figure out who they are outside of their parents, and it's almost like you can't ever do that. Like that's just not acceptable anymore. Like you can't just go experiment, with something or, some party favor, let's just call it that. You can't, there's just, you're playing with life or death. Yeah. And that's a huge fucking gamble.
Well, and that's one of the things, like I've been trying to go into schools, and reach out to that younger crowd a little bit. Cause you're right. Like back in the day, man, like there was that experimental phase, and I'm not gonna say it was safe, but it wasn't a life or death situation every night. And now you don't know what you're getting.
Yeah.
And that's what I try to tell these kids, parents, like just keep an eye on your kids. And for the kids, they need to know what's out there. They lack the life experience to really know what they're getting into. And we've seen a huge increase in juvenile overdoses over the last 2 years. That's been fatal, non-fatal, and it's just across the board. And there's some accidental ones too. People don't know what they're getting into. One of the biggest threats with fentanyl is, the kids are going out and they think they're getting Percocets or they're getting Oxys or they're getting a counterfeit pill that's actually got fentanyl in it. And you don't know how much is in each pill. Some of those pills, we send them off to the labs, they come back with trace amounts of fentanyl in them. And then some of them come back with 7 to 8 milligrams of fentanyl in them. And it takes about 2 milligrams of fentanyl to be fatal for somebody that hasn't built up a tolerance.
Sure.
So, it's scary. And, the pill manufacturers and making these counterfeit pills, they're targeting youth. They're targeting the juveniles through their marketing strategies, the types of pills they're making. They're making colorful pills, rainbow pills. And that's who they're targeting. Yeah. That's jacked up.
It's horrific. I mean, if you really think about it, that makes me think about something is that, I don't really quite know how I want to say this, but so if you're targeting the youth, I mean, is your goal, like if you're these drug traffickers or these pill manufacturers, is your goal to, harm your end user, right? Your quote unquote, your client, let's just call it that. If you kill your client, they can't come back and spend more money. So it's like, in my head, it's like, when you guys are sending off like maybe in these large seizures, if you send off 1,000 pills, is there 1 or 10 or 100 that are over? I mean, like, what have you guys kind of found out what that ratio is, or is it just?
It really depends on the actual seizure itself. I think I saw a stat. DEA reported like 1 out of every 10 pills.
Jesus
is potentially fatal. So it's when. There's stuff all over the internet. You can watch the cartels in their factories making all this stuff. There's no science behind how they're doing it. There's no quality control. Yeah. It's not a pharmaceutical company to where it gets pressed out, it gets tested again. And, it gets tested 100 times before it gets sent out the door for an actual consumer. It's not getting tested. The only way to know how much fentanyl is in one of those pills is it has to go to an actual lab. Yeah. I have super expensive equipment that I work with every day. It doesn't tell me how much fentanyl is in a pill. It just tells me if there is some or isn't. And man, we got people reporting that they're using like 50 to 100 pills a day.
They're using like a non-lethal amount of fentanyl.
They're
like
just using. They don't know. They're just using 50 to 100 pills a day. That's what they're saying. I don't know the truth behind that. But I've talked to a lot of people that reported that. Yeah. These same people are reporting that they have overdosed 5 to 10 times in a year.
Jesus.
So they're not learning from it, obviously.
Sure.
We have people that are their friends die one week and they die the next week. It's not having a huge impact on their life to make them change their ways. And that's how powerful that drug is. That's how addictive that drug is.
Yeah. Is it similar? I mean, I know it's obviously an opiate, but is it similar in the vein of like heroin, like as far as the addictive nature? Cause I think, historically, I think heroin was always one of the ones that was talked about. It's like, you do it once and it's like, there's a solid chance that you're going to do it again just because it's so addictive. Is it similar to that?
I think that's definitely one of those ones that once, and you're not everybody.
Yeah.
Everybody's bodies are built a little different.
Sure.
But, first, second time, you're probably going to end up being addicted.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
it's kind of and there's always going to be new drugs that come down the road.
Yeah.
That take out fentanyl, in the Southwest US area, there's not a whole lot of heroin right now. Fentanyl kind of pushed all the heroin out.
Yeah.
It's cheaper, it's easier to get. And that's it, and it's stronger. That's what people are looking for. East Coast, there's still quite a bit of heroin out there.
Yeah.
But the fentanyl hasn't caught up the same way that it kind of has with us. We're, Southwest US, pretty close to the border area, and a lot of that's pushing up from the border. Those northern states, I talked to a guy in Montana 2 months ago, and fentanyl is not a problem for him up there.
Yeah. Not yet.
Yeah, it will. It's just got to catch up. But by the time it catches up there, we're going to be into a new drug probably.
So why, what's the reason between like cutting it with everything? Like why are you finding fentanyl and cocaine? Why are we finding it in, like, what's the point of, I mean, I understand, like the old 80s movies where they, they take baking powder and they cut cocaine and stuff. Like we get that, right? We were talking about weight, but I mean, it still seems like to me it'd be cheaper to cut cocaine with baby powder versus putting it or mixing it with fentanyl. Is it to give people a more addictive high to come back again? Or like, what are they trying to get it into the States? Because like, what's the reason of cutting it with all these other drugs?
A lot of those drugs that are cut with fentanyl, the user doesn't know it's cut.
Yeah.
So now you're expanding your user base. People are starting to use that drug now. They're now addicted to that drug instead of the cocaine that they were addicted to.
Gotcha.
Some people are mixing meth and fentanyl together. I can't really figure that out. I mean, they have completely opposite effects. I talked to one dude and he was like, oh, it's going to balance each other out. Like if I do too much fentanyl, the meth is going to balance. And I'm like, that's not really how it works, bro. Like,
yeah.
So I don't know what the deal is with that. But yeah, I mean, they're trying to expand the market.
It just seems ridiculous, man. I mean, just the fact that, I think some of those at that conference, you had a couple of videos that you brought up, and I mean, going back to your comment a second ago where it's not regulated, I mean, they were mixing in like a rusted 50-gallon barrel and like all wearing masks. And it was, the classic, like, like distorting the voice of the guy, so so we didn't know who they were, but, I mean, the fact that they're doing it like that, I mean, not to say that cocaine or something else is manufactured any differently, but to kind of really see it right in front of you, it was like, God, that's intense, and some of those stills that you showed was like, it was like an ibuprofen or something along those lines. And it was like, I mean, next to each other and you're going, B is clearly it. It's like, okay, I could follow that. But to the naked eye, when you dump 5 in a hand and just, expect to be taking ibuprofen, like there's no way you'd be able to tell, you know? And, that just, that's intense, man. I was thinking about this, trying to kind of prep for this interview, and, I struggle. We've had quite a few people in the local town that I live in, that have passed away primarily from heroin overdoses. And you said something a second ago. It's like their buddy died yesterday, they died today. And it doesn't have this like ripple effect impact on the community. And that's what I don't understand. For me, having young children, like I'm a firm believer that at least at the very minimum, like in hopes to resolve it or it hopes to make sure that it never happens as best to your ability, is started at the house. And I'm not saying that all of these folks that I was close with that did ultimately succumb to heroin overdose and die, maybe were raised improperly. But it's hard for me to wrap my brain around why the addiction is there in the first place. Because, it's like, these people for years and, maybe they're a fuck up, for lack of better terms, or they did something bad. But it's like, why go to the drug? And so when you see some person die, I've had a lot of people be like, well, that should have impacted you, or it would have been great if you would have been able to be there. And it's like, how is it one person's job to protect another person?
Right.
Like they've got to step up, I just think about my son, he's 10 years old, so here in a few years, it's coming real quick. Once he's out on his own, his friends are not going to be there to protect him. And it's not their job, but it is my job, at least at this point, to say, hey, here's the potential problems, be aware of them. And it stinks as a father to kind of have to do that, because I don't know if I still probably have never had a conversation with my parents about drugs ever, but now you have to.
Yeah.
It's like, the times are changing, and we're going to talk about this. We're going to sit down, and it could be, watching a film that's a little bit more gruesome for a 10-year-old, but it's the reality that we live in, and it's kind of unfortunate. But I don't understand that ripple effect, man. Have you seen any studies as to why that doesn't impact the local community?
So there's a lot of people. You kind of touched on it a little bit. There's something that led that person to use drugs. Mm-hmm. Whatever that drug is, something led them to use that drug. They didn't wake up one day and say, man, I want to be addicted to heroin. And people don't realize that. A lot of people in the communities look at a drug overdose, and instead of being like, man, that's too bad, like, what's going on in that kid's life? They say, you know what? He wasn't a contributor to this society. We're in a better place now. We don't have to worry about him. And that's the wrong way to look at it. A ton of people look at it that way, though.
Yeah.
So, if you got a little compassion behind these overdoses, and like I said, look at, was it their childhood? What happened to them when they were young that made them do that? Was there an injury? They couldn't get their script anymore. Was that what led them to this? But there's, looking at what's left behind too. Mm-hmm. People don't think about the family that was left behind from that overdose. They just look at another dirtbag gone.
Yeah.
And we got to kind of change that perception, kind of wrap our heads around this a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, I'll be the first to admit I've felt a little bit of both sides of that, where, it's like the first friend that I lost was a good friend, and he was a roommate for a long time, and he passed away. It was unfortunate. And it kind of it had pretty decent impact, I would say, to the local community. It was like, was he not as straight and narrow as some people? Absolutely. I don't think anybody would ever argue that or question that, but it did impact the community in a way. And then it was like another really good friend passes, and all of a sudden it just starts to become commonplace in a weird way. And you're like, why is this happening? Like, what's going on? And it's like, I talked to a county commissioner the other day, and we went on to a pretty good conversation about mental health and trying to get some things going in that vein. But I've felt both sides of that, to where it's like the compassion is there, and then it's like, it seemed to like fade really quickly, because then a year later, another guy died. And then it was like 5 years in a row. It was like death. And it's just like, and they were all part of the same like group, and not all doing the same drug at the same time. It was like one of them was doing it, and others were like, oh, it's not for me, And then it's like, well, all right, if your good friend passed away, why the hell would you ever pick up a needle or whatever the means of, getting the drug are? Like, why would you ever take that step? And that's, so your comment about, what's going on kind of behind closed doors in my head is like, but it's hard to kind of be that way all the time. It's hard to constantly be like giving to another person or anybody, it's like, it's like, I don't want to say that I'm selfish, but it's like, sometimes you just get blinders on, and you're dealing with your kids, and you're going to freaking soccer practice, and, you're making dinners and all this stuff. And life is just blowing by. And then the next thing, pring, phone rings. Hey, so-and-so passed away. Mm-hmm. He took an Adderall laced with fentanyl, So, I mean, I think that we could all kind of take away from what you just said and have a bit more compassion and continue to be that way. Not just 3-4, weeks, 1 month after somebody passes away. It's like, let's just all make sure that we're all okay,
Yeah.
So,
well, especially those anniversary dates.
Yeah.
You know, like you're talking about somebody dies, there's 2 weeks, 3 weeks where everybody's just all around you, seeing how you are, you okay, what's going on, what do you need? And that fades out, and then you hit that 1 year mark and maybe that 2 year mark. You know, you got to check in on those people still, see how they're doing. That's happened. I've known people that have overdosed on the anniversary that their brother overdosed on. You know, I don't know if anybody was checking in on them or not, you know, but somebody probably should have been.
Sure.
You know,
chances are not, you know.
Yeah, they kind of forget about it.
Yeah.
So it's just, you know, getting everybody behind. And honestly, I don't know what the answer is, you know, to fix this. I think we're really far behind right now. And if we do fix this problem, it's going to take a lot of years. I think what our generation has done is really set up our children for failure. They got a long road ahead of them to battle this drug war. And maybe our parents did the same thing to us. I don't know. But everybody's kind of got to work together on this to fix it.
Yeah. What's, you know, what are your thoughts around, you know, I think Colorado just legalized, you know, essentially psilocybin mushrooms, and probably for more therapy. You know, you probably can't be rolling around with a pound of mushrooms and distributing it well. But you know, what are your thoughts? Is it, you know, have you seen any studies? Is there any conversation around that kind of stuff being a gateway? I mean, because that was like the, you know, DARE thing. It was like, don't smoke pot. You know, it's a gateway. You know, it is like, I mean, you know, not trying to, you know, commit myself to crime here, but it's like I've smoked marijuana and I've never done heroin. Right. You know, I've never done fentanyl. And so I don't know that it's a gateway. So what's your thoughts on the situation with the mushrooms? Is there any talks around that being I
haven't seen anything on it yet, and I haven't read the statutes on it yet. It opens the door for more experimenting. You know, like people talk about, is marijuana a gateway drug? No, I mean, that's a personal opinion thing. Like, I don't really think it is. Yeah. But it does open that door for experimenting. Sure. Of like, okay, this one's okay. Now I'm going to try this one, and maybe it progresses. And I've talked to a lot of people who have said, yeah, it started at weed and I felt good with it, so I was going to experiment, and here I am now sitting in jail talking to you, you know? But like you said, I know a ton of people. I smoked weed in high school. Like, I never did hard drugs. Like, you know, it wasn't a gateway drug for me.
It seemed like a massive leap, like jumping the damn, you know, Grand Canyon. It wasn't like well, I've done this before, might as well. You know, like, no thanks, I'm good.
I think a lot of it's, you know, who are you hanging out with?
Sure.
You know, peer pressure is middle schoolers, high schoolers. Peer pressure is a bitch, man.
Yeah. Yep.
But peer pressure goes both ways. You know, I could pressure you into doing something bad, but you could probably pressure me into actually doing something good.
Sure. Yeah.
And I don't think people look at it that way. They think of peer pressure more of just the bad thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think it's who you surround your friends with. You know, that we'll see where the shrooms and stuff go. It's going to change. You know, every time something gets legalized, the laws change over the following years, because people figure out loopholes in the statutes, and they got to seal those up. And so it's kind of a experimental phase right now, as far as I'm concerned. So we'll see next year kind of where that goes.
It seems like it's been so long ago since marijuana was legalized. I can't remember, you know, we probably voted it in, and then 3 years later we figured out some which way to control it. You know, I'm pretty sure it was the wild, wild west, you know, like I think I saw a documentary on Netflix. It was like, I don't know if it was a real documentary, but there was a couple that had a place in Boulder or one of those mountain towns, and like they had a place on the downtown Main Street, and like the community was against it. They got legalized, and then they got voted out and had to go. And so they were making like, you know, $1.5 million a month. Yeah. And then they had to go to like to the outskirts, like, you know, it's like, you know, the commercial district, and they're like, our business was cut by, you know, down to 1/8. I was like, oh shucks. You know, you're selling a drug, you're still making a shit ton of money.
And they still are today.
So that's funny. So let's take a step back for a little bit. How did you, you know, cause we obviously know each other. We have some history in the past. But you know, how did you get into law enforcement? Cause I didn't, I mean, when we kind of parted ways probably been 15 years ago or so, I would say.
Yeah.
And everybody's lives kind of seem to go this way and that way. But so what led you into law enforcement?
So when I was a kid, I actually had law enforcement around me growing up. My parents' friends and their friends, there was always cops around me. So it was always something that kind of sparked my interest. And then, got out of high school. I was too young. You got to be 21. So did some other jobs there. And I got 22 finally. I ended up one day just being like, all right, tired of swinging a hammer. I'm tired of working retail. I'm ready to do something different. And so I ended up going to the academy and kind of just followed my childhood dream.
Yeah.
So
what is it, a pretty long road to kind of get to where you're at now with this task force that you're on, or that you're commander of?
Where I'm at now, it's kind of funny because I ended up at the task force, and I never really thought about going into the narc world. It was I was good working on the street, being a patrol officer. I was a lieutenant in the patrol division at the time, and that position came up and it was offered to me. And I was like, you know what, that's be a good time to go do it. I was kind of getting a little bit burned out with what I was doing. But I'm happy I did it.
Yeah.
I was a little nervous at first. I didn't know I was going to go because I never worked in narcotics, and then they're like, hey, go run this task force.
Yeah.
With all these different agencies. And I was like, all right, here we go. So I dove into it. It was a huge learning curve for me.
I was going to ask, what was the learning curve like? I mean, that's this completely different world, right?
And it took me, so usually as the task force commanders, you don't really work cases. But I took on a ton of cases on my own because I had to learn.
Yeah.
I didn't know what my guys were doing. So I jumped into that, and I'm happy where I'm at now. I'm glad I did it. But that first 2 years was kind of nerve wracking, man.
Yeah.
It was tough.
I can only imagine. Oh, gosh. Yeah. That seems, I can't, my brain won't allow me to go there. Like, I don't even know what you guys do, but it doesn't seem like it would ever be easy.
There's a lot of, for me, a lot of meetings.
Yeah.
I got to go to. And I'm not a huge fan of meetings. So, but we got to travel a lot.
Yeah.
That sometimes makes it hard on the family. But I mean, it's good.
You guys do a lot of, and I'm going to reach like hard Hollywood here. Okay. You guys do a lot of like, whatever would it be called? Like joint task force? Like you work with the DA and stuff like locally, like you guys kind of, partner up to work certain cases.
So we have, 4 agencies in the task force right now. We work a lot with DEA, ATF. We have Homeland Security in our task force.
Okay.
So we work with a lot of different people. And it's, that's what makes us successful is we're able to pull all those resources together.
Gotcha.
And go after the big time criminals.
Is there any like Hollywood type animosity between groups? Like
There can be, man. Like,
the classic, like we're FBI, we're taking this crime scene over.
Yeah, I've seen it.
Yeah.
And sometimes when they cross jurisdictions into other task force areas, I've seen it get a little tough out there.
Yeah.
There's usually some words, but it gets figured out in the end.
Get it real quick.
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny. That's awesome. So you're doing, is this kind of, are you planting your roots in this gig for a while, or is there, aspirations to kind of take it to the next level, so to speak?
I think I'll probably be where I'm at for another few years. I'm not really on a time frame of when I have to leave. I would like to get back to working patrol. Obviously, if I go back to patrol, I'd be a supervisor at that point and probably not actually get to work the street as much as I want to.
Yeah.
But I really did this to be more well-rounded and have a better understanding of law enforcement work in general. So, if I do end up going back to patrol or another division, like I'm just going to be that much better at my job, I hope, because I've seen more. One of the big things I had when I was on patrol is I didn't know what the narcs did. And I think that maybe hindered me a little bit as a patrol officer because I didn't have the full picture of what was going on out there. And my supervisors didn't either. They'd never worked in that area too. So there was a lot of, just a lot of unanswered questions about what was really going on with those guys. So I'd like to take my knowledge of what I've been doing for the last several years and take that back to patrol and kind of help those guys understand a little bit.
Yeah.
Because I mean, it's Dude, I mean, we work cases for 2 years at a time before we ever arrest anybody.
Sure.
Patrol, that's not the deal. It's like that guy broke the law, he's going to jail, you know, and you know, they're gung ho dudes. That's what they want to do.
Sure.
They want to go clean up the streets.
Yeah.
And so it's hard for them to really realize when they're like, dude, you have a case for 2 years and you haven't arrested this guy?
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, that's the way it is, man. Like you
got to
build a good case.
Yeah. I'm imagining you guys have to build it, you know, layer and layer and layer and still to make a, you know, at least a substantial impact. Right.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm speaking out of turn here because I probably am, but you know, it doesn't really necessarily make sense to probably snatch up Joe Schmo on the street that's got a few pills, right? It would make sense to kind of follow that back to a much larger, you know, fish in that pond, correct?
Yeah, we want to go for the big guys that are actually bringing it in.
Yeah.
And you can see your work when you take down a big case and arrest a bunch of people. You can see it in the community.
You feel it like you because of the vacancy, or I would say like the void.
Yeah, there's this void of, okay, who's going to bring in the drugs now? Somebody's going to pick that work back up again in a couple of months.
Sure.
But there's a few months where drug prices go up because it's harder to find. You know, people are kind of scrambling right now. And it's cool to see that happen.
Yeah.
But it sucks at the same time because, like I said, in 2 months, somebody else takes over and you're right back at square one, starting over a new investigation, looking at a new organization. And it seems like it never ends.
So what's the answer? Like, what's the, you know, the way you look at it from the task force? I mean, it just seems like it's just this vicious cycle, you know? And I mean, we've heard about the war on drugs for as long as both you and I have been alive. It's never stopped. It's never going to stop coming over the border. It's never going to stop, you know? So what do we do to kind of better the situation?
So we got to regulate stuff a lot better. So a lot of this stuff is coming up off the border. You know, but say we regulate fentanyl so much that nobody wants to mess with anymore because it's too scary to deal with. You
mean as far as like changing it from like a class 2, like making a class 2 felony or something?
Yeah,
like
like
that?
just like all they're going to do is make a new drug at that point. And we've seen this over and over and over where one drug gets, you know, it's illegal now and they'll tweak those drugs just a little bit. Those chemists will tweak those compounds a little bit, make a new drug that is not scheduled. So it's not illegal at that point.
It's not,
And those new drugs push through and they push hard. And then they end up getting scheduled and you can't have them anymore.
Yeah.
But then it starts that cycle over again. So if we could figure out a way to kind of control that a little bit, we'd be doing pretty good because synthetic drugs are kind of the thing now.
Yeah.
You know, your weed, heroin, stuff like that, it's going away. As far as, I mean, weed's here to stay.
Sure.
But as far as like big drugs being trafficked,
Gotcha.
it takes acreage. It takes a lot of land to do that. Same with heroin. You know, you got to grow crops to do all that stuff. So they're starting to do these drugs like fentanyl that, I mean, we could press out thousands and thousands of pills in a day in a room this size.
Gotcha.
You know, so
it's easier to get to that economy of scale.
Yeah.
You know, and they can probably ship it easier.
Shipping's super easy. So you got a small footprint and a lot of profit in it.
Oh man. So we raise awareness. I mean, because obviously you guys are trying to hammer down on this and we're sorry, my daughter's laughing at the background. So we're going to, we're going to put regulations on this stuff. But like you said, they're going to create another drug. So how do we get ahead of that curve?
So a lot of it comes down to the communities.
Yeah.
People got to say enough is enough.
Sure.
So, but it's one of those things people don't want to talk about. I still talk to people and maybe they live in a small community and they're like, yeah, that's a problem, but thank God it's not here.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, you better look a little harder because it's actually here.
Sure.
It's not on the scale of Denver, Phoenix, LA. There's more people there.
Yeah.
Of course, there's gonna be more drugs.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you got small communities that a lot of people just don't want to believe it's there, and they're just blown away. Like, I'll do a presentation in a small community, and they're like, "Was that like just to scare us, or is that real?" And I'm like, "No, that's real."
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's in your middle school. Yeah, no, it's
Yeah, it's in the middle schools.
Yeah.
There's kids all over the state that are They're overdosing in school, in the bathrooms, at home.
Yeah.
You know, we got to talk about this. People don't want to talk about it. They don't want to talk about drugs. You know, it's like talking about sex. Nobody wants to talk about it because it's uncomfortable. We're not going to talk about it publicly.
Oh, it's weird. Nobody ever did that.
Yeah, it's like, you know.
So,
but yeah, that's just, we got to raise awareness, and it's going to take the communities coming together and saying enough is enough. There's not enough cops out there to do that.
Gotcha. So if we put our foot down as a society, you know, or as a community, however we want to look at it, and say, you know, we're not doing fentanyl, you know, we don't want it here, you know, we kind of put that wall, then that makes it harder for the manufacturers or distribution lines to distribute to our area, right?
Yeah.
And so hopefully that mentality then grows larger and larger and larger, right?
Mm-hmm. And also, I mean, bring in some resources. You know, as far as, you know, if you're looking at recovery facilities, there's not a whole lot in the big cities. Denver's got quite a few, Pueblo, Colorado Springs, Phoenix. But you look at these smaller communities on the outside, they don't have resources for people to go to.
Yeah.
You know, if somebody wants to go to rehab, they got to get shipped out. You're looking at a lot of money to do it too.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
the small communities just don't have that.
Sure.
They need inpatient facilities, and they don't exist. So, you know, give the people the tools they need to fight these addictions too. You know, less users on the street, less people are buying their stuff.
Sure.
So
less crime, less everything.
Less, yeah. And I can, man, I mean, a lot of the crimes tie back to like property crimes. Everything ties back to drugs, it seems like.
Yeah.
You know, I talk to people all the time and I'm like, dude, why'd you steal that shit? And they're like, I was high, bro. I've never done anything like that in my life. But when I'm high, I just get sticky fingers. Like, you know? Yeah. And it's like, you know, the drugs tie back to all those other crimes and everything. And crime still, get rid of drugs, we're still going to have crime.
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
you know, we're going to have the assaults, everything like that. But it would help a lot if that wasn't a factor in all this.
Yeah, I mean, it would be easier to, I think, map the source of the problem, right?
Yep.
You get rid of all the onesie twosies, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, here's actually the real root of the problem. Going back to the facility thing real quick, you know, we touched on it very briefly, but you know, there has been a substantial amount of money appropriated towards trying to do a remodel of the old Denier facility in Southwest Colorado. And I was just talking to that commissioner the other day, and you know, that would be good for that community, I think, personally. Now, I know that it has a tax implication and it's going to hurt everybody's pockets, and nobody ever wants to hear taxes are going to be increased. Yep. Well, I don't have a drug problem. Well, you know, maybe your 13-year-old doesn't now, but when he's 16, he could, you know? So, you know, I've kind of heard both sides of that conversation, but in my mind, even if we can't do an entire renovation, you know, at least having a section of it renovated so that way that it can capitalize on drug and alcohol abuse, mental health issues, and, you know, youth like awareness, or, you know, kind of a rehabilitation center for the youth specifically. You know, not saying that if somebody's addicted, if they're no longer a youth, or if they're, you know, 19 years of age or whatever, but I do think that would be a good situation, because at least the way I read it, the slate shows that is not going to be a La Plata County facility. It will be basically, and this is where like it kind of does get a little bit gray, but it's supposed to support the region. Correct. Which in my mind, I'm like, okay, is that the Southwest region? Is that Utah border, New Mexico border? You know, is that all the way over to Archuleta County? I think is like Pagosa area. You know, what does that cover? Because that's a lot of people. You know, that's, you know, I think La Plata County last I looked 57,000 people. So then let's look at Montezuma. Let's look at Archuleta. Let's look at the northern section of San Juan County. You know, that could be a couple 100,000 people, and however much, you know, the demographic has that's, you know, has mental health issues or has drug addiction problems, drug and alcohol abuse. And I mean, it could be a big deal, you know? So I'm trying to kind of get that, at least the conversation going about it. And I'm not saying I have the answers to it, but I think it's worth having a conversation with people like, look, this is going to have a tax impact on all of us, but will it be for the betterment of the community? You know, because I do think in a sense that it could be another barrier of entry, right? for the drugs to come in. So it's like if we start to kind of correct, and it has like this little microcosm, and the tailwind of that, it's like we have a problem now. This can help alleviate that problem. And then over here in the houses, we're coaching our children, and we're being open and upfront and honest with them. And all of a sudden we're tackling it from two different ends. And at least we have a fighting chance to kind of raise awareness and start to correct the problems that we already have day one, you know, because you're right. It's like if somebody's going back to our first comment, it's like if somebody's addicted and they die today and then their brother dies a year from now on their anniversary, like that person could have gone to that facility because he's probably deathly afraid or embarrassed to talk to his family or his friends, you know, because his brother's friends are his friends and all of that, you know. So it's like there's this, you know, he's shamed about reaching out because God damn it, he's too strong. You know, he can beat this thing. Well, statistically speaking, no, you can't. You know what I mean? And so that's the problem. So it's like if we would have had a facility like that, that person could have maybe gone there and got help in a more of an anonymous fashion, you know, and not had to feel embarrassed about it. And then you think about that, like the compounding impacts, like that guy goes and gets help. How many people could he then help? You know what I mean? And it's just like, so I would love to see something like that come in to the Southwest community, because I do think that it would have a profound impact, you know?
And it's much needed. Man, the money side of that. So a lot of that funding came from Big Pharma getting sued. You know, they kind of started the Oxy deal, all that stuff. They were over prescribing, you know, maybe not marketing their drug like it was supposed to be marketed. You know, they got in trouble, they got sued. So all that money came in from them and it got divvied up. And so you're talking about maybe taxpayers paying a little bit more, because people look at that number and they're like, wow, billions of dollars got awarded. That gets eaten up quick. You can't. I mean, I'm looking at some of these regions. So, it got divvied up by region around the state and everything like that. And when it comes down to it, I think La Plata County is going to get like, and don't quote me on this, but it's like $280,000 a year.
Yeah.
What's that going to do?
Yeah,
that probably won't even keep the lights on.
Yeah,
it's
like, next to nothing. I mean,
but it's a good start.
Yeah, it is. It's something.
Yeah, we just need other people adding to that pot a little bit, and you could actually get something pretty cool going.
Yeah. Well, I do think that they got grant funding for like, and it wasn't a ton again, but it was like 1.2 million, which, you know, that's not going to do all the renovation by any means. But it's like, okay, we've got this. How could we earmark? And then what could we do, you know, to get this? Like what pisses me off so many times is like everything has to go through like a vote, right? Especially if it's taxes, and nobody ever wants to raise taxes. You know, they're like, oh, I don't want that. And I don't want my taxes to go up either. I work hard for my money. You know?
Exactly.
Nobody wants that. Right. But it's like, I've always felt like if the government, whether it be, you know, federal, state level, it doesn't matter. If they would just like open up the book and be like, all right, here we go. We've got roads, we've got health, and we're going to put 100, 200, 300, 7 million, you know, and like just say, here's what we're doing. And this is exactly where your money went. I think people would be like, all right, you know what? You were open, you were honest. Cool. You know, because like, I think the thing that pisses people off is like, man, I paid $35,000 this year in taxes, and this damn road has had a pothole for 7 years, you know, and that's how they kind of equate it. So it's like, I feel like if we could just be honest and say, I don't think people would bitch about taxes as much. They still would be like, I'm not paying for that shit. You know, well, like I don't even use that road.
Man, when we're talking about recovery too, though, I mean, we got to get that stigma away from what's going on. Because like I said, there's a lot of people that think the world's just a better place without addicts.
Yeah.
And you know what? It is, but not when they're dead.
Yeah.
Like when they're recovered.
Sure.
When they're going through recovery. That's what makes the world a better place. They still need to be here. They deserve to be here.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So we got to break down that wall a little bit and get people to understand what's going on.
Well, and I think people being less ashamed of it, you know, and I don't personally care whether anybody knows this about me or not, and I've said it on other podcasts, but you know, my father was a recovering drug addict and alcoholic my entire life, like growing up. That's not who I am. Probably because I saw maybe at times the way he was, and I don't want to be that. I don't want to be that for my spouse. I don't want to be that for my kids. I don't want to be that in the community. And he's not a fuck up, like at all. Like, and I love him to death. But the reality of it is that's what he was. And he'll be the first person to tell you, yep, got a 25-year patch or badge or coin or whatever they give you, and I lost it. You know, I tipped the bottle up again. Thank God it never led to drugs, but I'm back in it. I'm back in the system. And I've seen that it ebbs and flows, and it's happened my entire life with him. But he's not afraid to say that, and I'm not afraid to say that because it's like, I think that going back to that stigma conversation is like people don't want to be associated with somebody else who has a problem. It makes them look bad, right?
Yeah.
It's the same thing. And I will say this, there's a lot of people that I've wanted to have on this podcast that they're like, oh, I don't know if I can come on there. Like it's just, maybe it's not the right fit. And I'm like, what's the real reality? Are you afraid that somebody's going to actually have to maybe know who you really are? Or you're afraid that we're going to talk for more than 5 minutes and then you finally start to calm down and settle into it and you're going to say something that's real. And then the whole thing you've built in the public face is all gone because now you're talking real to me. Yeah. It's the same stigma in a different fashion that people don't want to say, okay, well, my father was an alcoholic. Or, my best friend growing up, he died of a drug overdose or, but I think that if people are just blunt with it and they'll realize real fast that somebody else has dealt with that same exact thing. Like they've had a father that was an alcoholic or they've had a father that was a drug addict, or a mom or a dad or a brother or sister. And so I think if people just stop trying to hide from the truth, even if they've messed up, even if they were the ones that used to be an addict, like you're not an addict. Like if you stopped and you're seeking help, like maybe you always have addictive tendencies, sure. But like you cannot let your past define you, whether that's you doing something directly or other people in your family that were close to you that did something directly. Like it doesn't have to define you. And so I think getting back to that conversation of like, just be open and truthful about what it is. And let's get past the stigma because these people do need help. Like 100%. They need fucking help, Bad. And you said it earlier and it really did kind of strike with me because I've found myself when these 5 people in my life had died, by like the third one, I just started being like, no, fucking saw that coming, and like, it took me like a year to kind of get past that thought in my head and go, that was really fucked up, Kyle. Like, and I wasn't trying to not be there for them or something like that. I wasn't just trying to brush them off or, oh, they're just another addict. But it was like, in my head, I was like, well, saw that coming. It's like, why didn't I do something? Or why didn't the other people around that person do something? So again, I think nobody wants to be associated, right? Because you feel like you're guilty by association all of a sudden. Yeah. If you associate with a drug dealer, then you're a drug dealer, right? Or you're a druggie. No, not necessarily. I'm a good guy. I'm just trying to protect this dude I've known for 10 years and he fell into the wrong path. Now he's freaking, down at whatever bar selling cocaine. He's a good person, but he's just fallen into a bad gap, you know? And so I think if people can really get around that, it would be better.
It would be way better. People are worried about, like you said, losing their jobs because maybe they had a shady past 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. Like if somebody fires you because you had a shady past 10 years ago, but you've been doing great since then, like you probably don't want to be there anyways.
Yeah.
Like, go find somewhere else because something's going to happen at some point where you're going to be like, fuck this place. Like, so, I mean, and it's been kind of cool over the last couple of years because I've really been out talking a little bit more about this. But I've partnered up with some people in recovery to go teach some classes and do stuff. And I think it's kind of an eye opener for some of these groups because the cops are over here and the addicts are over here, and we're against each other and that's not the case at all. Yeah. And I think when people see us actually come together and try to do a presentation, whatever it is, it's always around drugs, but, they kind of see both sides of it and it changes the way they think a little bit on some of it. I think that we can actually partner with them and, I'm not there just to throw them in jail. Yeah. They're recovering, they're not actively breaking the law, actively doing drugs, but people still think that like, it's weird that the cop is pairing up with somebody in recovery. I'm like, it's all good. Yeah. Like,
I mean, it's for the betterment of it's for the good of the cause, right? I mean, different circumstances, you may never have talked to that gentleman, right? Yeah. But at the end result, one person in that crowd could hear you guys talk and be like, light bulb, you know what I mean? So that's awesome. So in your opinion, how do we make the conversation or the topic of conversation more prevalent in the household? Because, I kind of said it the other day and I was, it was one of those things where most of the time in like a public setting, I'll hold my breath, I'll sit, I'll listen, and I don't talk. But in that specific meeting, and this was a little bit because there was a lot of stuff going on with let's just say the school board, right? And I do still, and I will stand by this, is that we in our community, a lot of times are reactive versus proactive. And I said that in that meeting, and you had some things good to say about it. Some of the things we've talked about tonight, but the immediate like nose up in the air of some of those other parents in that room were like, it was again like, well, we don't have that problem, but you don't have it today.
Yeah.
So how do we get that conversation going to where it starts at the family? Like how do we, in your thoughts, like how do we build that conversation? Because I do, going back to it, I do think that is where this all starts. No matter what, it could have been 15 years ago. It could have been from like a childhood incident. Something is happening that has led, that's just sit there. And like you said, like it could have been something so long ago, but it's compounded. Mm-hmm. And that's why that person, like he didn't just wake up today as a 12-year-old and go, I want to do heroin tomorrow. How do we start, or how do we push along the conversation? Because I feel like that's the biggest reason why I'm doing this podcast. Like not just this one, but all of them. Is to get the conversation of certain things that I find interesting, or individuals or topics that I find interesting, get it out there to the public and get that thing spinning. So in your thoughts, how do we do that to where we get it in the minds of these parents and we get them okay with talking to their kids?
Yeah.
Like what do we do in your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, we got to make it a priority. You talk about that meeting a few months ago, and how many families were there? That
was the other reason why I got pissed off.
The turnout bummed me out a lot.
Yeah.
I've done presentations and stuff where only a handful of people showed up. I'm glad that I can get the word out there a little bit and do that for the people that will show up. But we got to make this a priority.
Yeah.
And it's awkward to talk about this stuff, especially with your kids.
Mm-hmm.
You're sitting there, you're like, okay, they don't know about drugs. Why would I tell them about drugs?
Yeah.
Well, middle school, high school, they're going to be around it.
Sure.
Maybe not elementary school. It's probably a little early. But you just got to start it early.
Yeah.
So when there's an opportunity for when the school puts something out that says, hey, look, drug task force is going to be here. They want to talk about drugs in our community. Mm-hmm. The drug task force isn't going there because they think that it's just going to be a fun sort of deal. And, it's going to we're there because there's a problem, mm-hmm. and we got to get the word out and let people know. We just got to be blunt about it.
Yeah.
You got to rip the Band-Aid off and go for it.
Sure.
I think the more of us that do that and kind of get the ball rolling on it, I do a presentation for you. Maybe you go tell 3 or 4 of your friends. Mm-hmm. Next time I do one, maybe at least we have 3 or 4 more families that show up.
Sure.
Instead of just 3 in total, 4 in total, maybe, maybe after 3 or 4 presentations, I can get up to a crowd of 15, mm-hmm. Let's just keep doing this and keep the ball rolling and get the word out there.
Yeah. Well, and then, that presentation. So, our kids are younger, but we also know that eventually they're going to be in middle school, so we went, and all the other families were, they had kids that were older. But if somebody's listening to this, I'll say, if you hear about one of these meetings, whether it's Joey presenting or somebody else presenting, you don't have to take your child to that meeting. Like you don't have to go sit down here and, because maybe that's not the way that you want to teach your child, but you can go yourself and hear the brutal hard reality and see the photos and get a no frills bullshit answer from Joey and say, this is what it is. Cut and dry, boom, boom. It's like, there's no sugarcoating it. And that's what I found in that last presentation I saw. So if you're listening to this, go to these meetings, hear the non-sugarcoated version, and then go back and find the way to explain that to your child. But don't sugarcoat it so much to where it doesn't have an impact, right? Especially, if you have a family that doesn't talk about that kind of things, doesn't mean that your kid's not going to be in front of it in the next year or 2 or 3, and so I think that might be a good option for some people, if they feel like, well, I don't want my kid to see, I don't know what he's going to present, what's going to be on the screen. None of us do, but the reality of it is that's what it is,
Yep. Well, and I mean, my ultimate goal is actually getting into the schools and talking to the students themselves. Mm-hmm. So I've been talking to a ton of schools. They're on board. They want to do it, but how do we do that? They obviously,
you mean legally?
It's more of, we got to target an audience, right? Mm-hmm. So you want to go to a high school that has 1,200 students. Is a gym assembly going to be appropriate?
Yeah.
Probably not. The kids aren't going to pay attention. It's going to be chaos. And the kids that probably need to be there aren't going to show up. They're going to ditch, Yeah. So I've been working with them of how do we get this message out there to them? And it's not a program that's going to be as blunt as what I would give to parents mm-hmm. or staff. I've done a ton of stuff with staff at school districts. But can we work that into a health class? What does that look like? Can I come in 2 days out of a semester and just spend times with these kids in the health classes and kind of tell them what's really going on? Because the problem is only going to get worse. We need to brace ourselves for what's going on.
Is the school districts, are they kind of embracing that?
Some of them are.
Yeah. Some of them want to act like there's no drugs on the planet.
Man, I mean, some of the teachers do drugs too. So, they got,
Dude, I swear in middle school, I went to a party I probably not should have been at. And I swear to this day, one of our teachers was definitely smoking pot. And it may not have been her, but it really looked like her. And I was too young to be there. So I was hanging out with way older kids and I was in the corner oh my God, they're drinking beers, But it was one of those ones walking back I saw you. I'm pretty sure you were smoking pot, So, yeah. I mean, but pot's irrelevant anymore, but so.
I mean, we've, I think that's just, you got to get the word out there. And I'm actually working with one smaller school that they're actually going to let me come in and spend a couple days with the kids in one of their classes. And it's kind of going to be the trial run to see how it goes.
Yeah.
And I kind of want to push that out a little bit more. Just kind of let these kids know what's going on out there.
Yeah.
We, it blew me away at a young age. We had a juvenile overdose and it was fatal. And it didn't seem to slow the kids at the high school down with what they were doing. We're looking at their Snapchats and everything after that. They're just blasting stuff out there. And it's why didn't that, you'd think at that younger age,
it would have hit.
They would kind of hit because they are still kind of in that experimental phase. Mm-hmm. Some of them it definitely had a huge impact and turn it around. Mm-hmm. But had I been able to educate those kids a little bit before that incident happened, would they have overdosed? I don't think they would have.
Sure.
But they didn't know what they're getting into.
Yeah.
We get a ton of accidental overdoses. That's not just people purposely taking a drug and maybe they think it's something else and it's not. I mean, all over the state, man, we're talking about 1-year-olds picking up pills off of a floor in a hotel room.
Yeah.
And overdosing. There's, and it happens a lot, Mm-hmm. So can we get, obviously I can't educate a 1-year-old, but maybe a middle schooler if they find something like that, you know, can we kind of, like you're talking about, how do we get this conversation rolling?
Yeah.
To where we can help prevent some of this stuff.
Yeah. Well, I think it'd be good too. I mean, obviously, I think it would be more receptive from somebody like yourself. And I mean this in no negative way at all, but you're not, like a blue shirt cop, you're not coming in with, and dressed to the nines. Like it's almost like plain clothes, you've got some tattoos, you got a beard. And I think kids do see that and they go, all right, cool. Take a breath of fresh air. He's not going to pull me over and give me a speeding ticket this afternoon. So I think it would have a better chance to not fall on deaf ears if it's by someone like yourself or, somebody else in your task force that kind of has a look about themselves, and I'm not saying you look like a dirtbag, but, I do think that kids are more receptive if somebody that they can kind of more or less align themselves with, right? That doesn't seem like a parental figure, but somebody that's respected. But it's like, okay, this guy, I can relate to him in some sort of fashion, right? And it could just be like a mental image to somebody, but that is a big deal. Going back to the comment real quick about the larger schools. So I moved to Colorado in 1997 or 8, something like that. And so when I left Northern Louisiana, each grade, so my 7th grade class had 1,000 students. We were like a 4 or 5A school or something like that. So I think the actual high school at that time, had I gone there, was closer to 5,000 between all the grades. And, it was wild. Like I still feel like I'm absolutely blessed that I got out of the scenario, and it was so weird. It was a classic, ski trip. We came up in March and we were here in June or something like that. It was a classic Colorado bullshit trip, some, Southerner with a twang. But we ended up here, and I think we moved here, it was probably, so it was 8th grade. So I would have been, 13, 14 years old. But I was talking to somebody about this the other day, and, so the first time, and I'm not afraid to admit this because I got past it and I'm thankful. The first time that I did acid, I was 13 years old. I was still in Louisiana. I was at a party I shouldn't have been at. I was hanging out with some older kids. They were all neighborhood kids. We rode bikes at one time, and now somebody gets a driver's license, and and he's hanging out with older kids, and inevitably I'm there. And I think about that time, and I think about my kid 3 years from now. I think about his 10-year-old kid. And I had no business doing that, but I was still so young to be doing a drug like that. And I'm very thankful that not only did it not alter my mental state to a point to where I couldn't recover, but I'm also thankful that very shortly thereafter, I moved to a small rural town in a community where that wasn't acceptable or it wasn't prevalent, because I do personally think that because of the people I was hanging out with, I would have gone down a wrong path. Not because I wanted to, but almost by mistake. And so I think that going back to that situation of talking to a school of 1,200 or a class of 1,200, you got to do it in a microcosm, right? Like, we're not in a vacuum here, but you've got to do it to 10 or 15, 20 parents, 20 kids. And that will hopefully, maybe not all 20 of those, do the right thing and go tell their neighbors. And then all of a sudden it just has this huge compounding impact. But I think that starting much smaller will absolutely have a huge impact, in my personal opinion. And as a weird way of looking at this, I think starting in more of a rural setting will have a bigger impact. Mm-hmm. Just having experienced that personally. Like when I moved to Colorado, it was so great. It was like a breath of fresh air to I almost got to start over, because I literally did. I had to meet all new friends and everything, but it was like I got to be a new version of me and a version of who I was, not with these kids that I rode bikes with for years and were, just doing stupid shit at 13 years old. It's crazy. Yeah. And so I'm so glad that, I got through it, moved here. But I feel like from a personal standpoint, I think that the impact on the rural communities, you have a chance to stop it. I mean, maybe not stop it, but at least get the conversation out there to where mm-hmm. it's very well known. It's not just, we're not hiding around it, so that's awesome, man. I hope that these schools really work with you, and
it'd be good. And with parents and stuff, man, for the parents out there that are interested in having somebody like me mm-hmm. come out and talk, you can literally call your local police department and be like, hey, do you have a drug task force? Not everybody does.
Yeah.
Are you part of a drug task force? If you are, can I talk to somebody there? I want some public education on this. Mm-hmm. And some parents are really good at organizing that stuff. They have, with Facebook groups and everything like that, they can kind of help that happen a little bit. And maybe we get a few more people there. So, if anybody wants a presentation and wants to know what's going on in their community, mm-hmm. call your local PD and ask for somebody like me.
Yeah.
That's changed a lot with all the NARC groups. There's somebody out there that's willing to come out and talk.
Sure.
And maybe they don't have somebody in their unit that can do it, but they'll find somebody.
Yeah.
If you get a hold of me and you live in Utah or something like that, like I got connections. I can find somebody to come talk to your community. Like,
yeah. Well, you hit on something really quick there, and I just want to talk about it. So, that I won't call it a convention, but that presentation that you did, it was, there wasn't a lot of people there, but I think that was because it was not publicized in the right manner. Right. Like 100%. We found out about the day of, and I was like, what? Where? So we go. People that told us about it didn't even go because something else came up and they couldn't make it. So it's like going back real quick, people are great about making Facebook groups. So if you get a hold of somebody in your community that's willing to come and talk, I think you owe it to yourself, because I think that the more people are there, the more questions that are going to come up. Mm-hmm. And if somebody's there and you're a little bit afraid to ask in a public setting, and somebody else, chances are, is thinking along the same lines.
Yeah.
And so I think if you're hearing this, and you've got this speaker coming in, you would be doing yourself and your community a disservice if you didn't start up a little Facebook group or tell as many people as you can, because the school systems, they're overwhelmed as it is. They might put it on their Facebook. I don't follow a school system's Facebook.
Yeah.
I don't follow our town's Facebook because it's garbage, and I love people and I'm on boards with the town, but they also do other things. They don't have time to do this Facebook thing. So it's like, the mothers and the fathers and the sisters and brothers, like they need to promote that for yourself. If you've got a guest speaker coming in, especially to talk about things like fentanyl and the problems that are real. So, but
yeah. And it's, my presentations, it's not just the drugs that are here, it's the signs of drug use. Mm-hmm. It's, cause there's people that come up to me and they're like, somebody overdosed and died. And they come up, they're like, I just didn't see it coming. Yeah. And I'm thinking to myself, looking at this case, and I'm like, how did you not see this coming?
Sure.
And it's because they just don't know.
Yeah.
They don't know what to look for.
Yeah.
So it's definitely worth the little bit of education. And if you want to listen to me talk and you think I'm full of shit, then okay, that's fine. Like I don't know. Like some people, I'm just not going to change their minds. So,
well, I would say don't go into these conversations, trying to be one-sided about it or be a know-it-all. Like, we should be going to these conversations wanting to have an open discussion. It's not a right, wrong, or it's damn sure not blue or red. It's not an election. There is an issue, and you owe it to yourself and everybody around you to not go in and be the smartest guy in the fucking room. Just shut up, listen, and then come back like in kind and say, okay, well, here's this, and have you had this happen? And chances are that speaker is going to have more real life experience than anybody else in that presentation, group. So, don't go into it wanting a fucking argument. I hate that's garbage.
Man, and I learn a ton when I do them.
Yeah.
Like, especially like you're talking the big groups, a lot of really good questions come up.
Sure.
And there's sometimes like somebody's like, hey, I saw this. I did a presentation for the Navajo Nation. And it's not my area. I don't work down there.
Yeah.
And, just through that conversation, through those questions, they're telling me stuff they're seeing down there that we haven't seen yet in our area. And I'm like, I haven't seen that yet, but it's coming.
Yeah.
Now I can keep my eye out for it, So I learned just as much at those things than people learn from me. So sure. It's always good to go and get that stuff done. So
what was that thing? I'm probably gonna butcher it, but oh God, what was it? Narcan. Mm-hmm. Narcan. And so you were talking about that. Do you want to expand on that a little bit, like what that is, what that can do?
So a couple different forms of Narcan. There's a nasal spray, and then there's like the injectable, and you find that on EMT bus and at the hospital. That's really where that's used at, but it's a great tool. All of our patrol officers carry it on them. It gets deployed all the time on a daily basis, and it saves lives.
What is it? What does it do though?
So it'll actually, if somebody has an opiate overdose, it'll reverse that overdose. It's supposed to. It doesn't always work 100% of the time. It kind of depends on how much that person ingested, how long since they overdosed. But it'll actually reverse that process. And it happens quick. If you're going to use Narcan on somebody, it happens pretty quick. It brings them back fast. Like I've seen it used where I was 100% positive people were dead.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden they're sitting up talking to me and I'm like, holy shit. It's like you're talking to a ghost sometimes.
Yeah.
You know? And so there's a lot of weird stigma around that too. You know, it comes back to why are we saving the dirt bags?
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, man, if a few more people were on board with it, it, you know, we could save a lot more lives.
Can you buy it over the counter? Or?
Buy it over the counter. You can get it at pharmacies. Kind of depends on where you're at, what state you're in, everything like that. A lot of places in Colorado, the health departments have programs. They get funding for that stuff. They hold events. They'll just go hand that stuff out.
Gotcha.
I helped with an event last week. It was for hotel staff and restaurant staff, managers, owners.
Yeah.
Because that stuff happens a lot in the hotels and the restaurants. And it's free. They just hand it out. Stuff's expensive. So if you get your hands on it for free, take advantage of that.
Absolutely. So when they kind of come back around, all I can think about right now is like that Tarantino flick where he like stabs that chick in the heart. You know, that's all I'm thinking. So the fact that it's a nasal spray, that's a lot better than jabbing somebody in the heart.
They'll still come up sometimes swinging.
Really?
Yeah. So people, you're probably going to react to it different than I would react to it.
Sure.
You know, some people just come up and wake up and they're fine. And then some people just come up and they're swinging. So it kind of goes both ways with it. But it's safe to use. You know, if you were to administer it on somebody that maybe you thought overdosed on an opiate and they didn't, you're not going to hurt them by administering it.
Okay.
And a lot of people are using it, family members, so they know that they have a loved one that's got a problem that they're dealing with. They carry it in their cars, carry it in their purses, always have it on them. They're starting to push all this stuff through the schools now for the staff to hang on to. So all the staff has access to it just in case something happens during school.
Sure.
Just a matter of time, it's going to happen.
Yeah.
So great tool, great drug. It works.
So is there a period after you administer the Narcan as to when you need to get this person to a hospital? Yeah. 'Cause it's not like you're not just done overdosing right after the nasal spray.
No. And pretty much what happens is you go into immediate withdrawal.
Okay.
So what happens though is if you have a lot of fentanyl in your system, that Narcan will wear off and you potentially can overdose again within 60 to 90 minutes.
Oh, Jesus. Okay. All right.
So it's really important. A lot of people, like I told you, we talked to a lot of people that say they overdose 5 to 10 times in a year. They never went to a hospital.
Yeah.
You know, they don't have to. Cops, EMTs, they can administer Narcan to an adult in the state of Colorado, and that person doesn't have to go to the hospital.
Gotcha.
You know, obviously if it's a juvenile, it's gonna be a little different. We're gonna take them to the hospital. But, you know, it's really important for those people that have friends going through this, family going through this. If they overdose, use Narcan on them. You can't get them to go to the hospital. Don't leave them alone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like for probably a couple of days, like you want to be with them.
Okay.
And the withdrawals too they're horrible. You know, it's just, you know, it's painful to watch. I've never been through withdrawals. But from what I'm told, these fentanyl withdrawals it's like having the worst flu of your life and timesing that by 10 and having it for a week.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And there's one way to fix it quick. Take more drugs.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's always the answer, right?
So these people got to be monitored. You know, you got somebody that falls out on you, keep an eye on them.
That's crazy. So, I mean, 60 to 90 minutes, but you know, worst case scenario, if you do have to administer Narcan, you've got some time, you know, you can call the EMT, paramedics, get somebody there.
Yep.
You know, I mean, it seems like that's kind of next step. Administer, don't like wait and be like, so how was your evening? Yeah. You know, administer, call. God, that's just.
And yeah, that's the big thing is like, there's the debate of, do you call law enforcement, or not just law enforcement, do you call 911 first and then administer? Do you administer and then call 911? Like, probably administer it really quick because it takes 2 seconds to get it done. Call 911. And then if you got to give them another dose while you're on the phone with 911, wait for EMTs, you can. But yeah, it's a big thing. Like,
what's the thought there? I think you touched on it in that conference. But you know, if you call the police, is that person that took those drugs, are they subject to penalties?
No. So there's a Good Samaritan law
Okay.
in Colorado. So if they are, even the person that calls it in, you can't be charged for possession.
Okay.
So it's kind of, and that law has been around for a long time. You know, a lot of it was around alcohol poisoning with college kids for forever.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what people think about that law, but it's actually for drug overdoses that people are directly involved in it.
Gotcha.
And that's important for a lot of people to know, because there's a ton of these people that overdose and somebody was there with them.
Yeah, their buddy's sitting there being like, oh, God, no, I'm going to jail.
Yeah,
Like,
so what does their buddy do? They clean up all their stuff and they haul ass.
mm-hmm.
And then, I mean, I don't know what that buddy's going through the rest of their life. It's got to be horrible,
Yeah.
knowing that they probably could have saved their friend and they just bailed.
Mm-hmm.
Happens every day, man.
Yeah.
You know, so stick around, help out your friend.
Yeah. Call.
You know?
You
Call.
kind of, you know, yeah, you might get a slap on the wrist from your dad or something, but I mean, hey, your buddy's
Yeah.
going to survive and you're not going to get hit with possession. I mean, that's,
And that's one of the caveats to it is you have to remain on scene and you have to cooperate with law enforcement.
sure.
But I mean, people look at like cops are there. We just want to jam people up. Like that's changing.
Yeah.
Like we go to an overdose. We're not looking to jam a bunch of people up.
Sure.
I can tell you what, if I find the dealers that gave that person that fatal drug, yeah, I'm going to jam them up.
Yeah.
But the actual people, the addicts, the users, like we're not there to jam them up because
Sure.
they overdosed. You know, that's the last thing we want to do. We're in the business of saving lives.
That's awesome.
So-
I think people needed to hear that. That was like boom, nail in the coffin. Hell of a good episode right there. That was, yeah, that's the big deal though. You're right. People are afraid, you know, they, I mean, but to know that, you know, there is a Good Samaritan law, and I wasn't aware of it, probably because I'm not a drug addict, but, you know, that's big. You know, don't be afraid to call. I mean, you're not going to jail, you know, yeah, that's huge, man.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I saw the Good Samaritan law go into effect when I was in high school.
Yeah.
You know, one of my buddies, alcohol poisoning, you know, it wasn't drugs or anything like that, but you know, we called it in and he went to the hospital, got his stomach pumped, all that, but we didn't get in trouble by the law.
yeah.
I mean, our parents weren't very happy,
Yeah.
you know, but
They got over it. They still love you.
Everybody gets over
know?
it. Yeah, it's fine. So, and you know, he's around today. So
Yeah.
it was worth it.
Sure. Absolutely.
It's yeah, man, it's just that. And even people that have, a lot of people are like snitches get stitches, you know, that's like, there's t-shirts about it, you know, whatever. There's a ton of people out there that have gone to prison because their friends turned them in for dealing or whatever. And they're like, you know what, that dude saved my life.
Yeah.
I spent 5 years in prison. I did. And that sucked, but I still love that person because they saved my life.
Sure.
You know, they're like, I was going down a bad road. You know, people look at TV, Hollywood with the cartels and they're like, oh my God, yeah, it could happen, but
Sure.
it doesn't really happen.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of one of those things of, if you see something, report it.
Sure.
You know, there's ways, for people like me that work in the narc world that we can take some anonymous tips,
Sure.
you know, just maybe pointing us in the right direction. I don't need all your info, but maybe I'm not aware of a huge distribution house.
Sure. Absolutely.
So if you are, call it in real quick, be like, hey, might be worth keeping an eye on this. I don't want to give you anything else. If you'll at least give us that, you know, we can help kind of knock these organizations out of these communities.
Yeah. That's the big thing, you know.
Yep.
Get it out of the community is going to help, man. So, well, Joey, thank you so much.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for having me.
This was a good episode. This was a lot of fun. Maybe we can have it again in a year or so.
Definitely follow up on it and
Yeah.
see where it's going. We can talk about shrooms next year.
Yeah. See how much of an impact that's had on our taxes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much, Joey.
Man.
Talk to you soon, brother.
Thanks, man.
Felt
Are you listening? Damn.